I've been noticing in myself that I have this internalized rural phobia. I grew up on a farm, I grew up in a rural area, and the thing about it that I do judge is when people almost rationalize a bleak, hopeless, ugly, stuck kind of way of life instead of having this idea of getting better, of learning more, of being more beautiful, or of trying to look good, trying to be thin, trying to succeed. There's an attitude in rural areas, especially if they're not the cutesy towns that are kind of actually trying to make themselves up to date in their architecture and their buildings. And of course, like, there is an element of rural environments are poorer and they can't do that. But I don't like the resignation. I judge that. I judge when people are like slopping cream cheese on everything and acting like people who eat salads are so horrible and stupid. And it's like, no, sorry, but we're not cream cheese and cheese as a protein source, not the best. Like, it's pretty much a dessert, like, you know. And so I definitely have a judgment toward rural culture, and it's coming from, I like cultures that have a sense of striving to be better, to be the best, to succeed, to achieve, to look your best. And of course, I don't want it to go to the extreme where you're like you're doing that striving in a way that is actually at an extreme loss to yourself, because there's always a limit to the striving, and there's sometimes even escaping the void through that striving. But just having that resignation where you're wearing those like sparkly butt jeans from 2005 and you're like talking about what's in the potato salad, it's so cringe icky to me. It's gross. And I don't like kind of idealizing looking ugly as though it means that you're tough. That's another thing I don't like about rural. Like, there's kind of this idea that, oh, you shouldn't be caring about what you look like. That's vain. Or you shouldn't be caring about doing this or that. Like, there's just a kind of futility that, you know, actually you can care about a lot of different things, and you can be curious. You don't have to be so rigid and tough all the time. So my internalized rural phobia isn't directed exactly toward me. But I use that term because it's part of my identity that I came from a rural background, and I am judged as such. And so I'll get annoyed by people judging rural culture in caricature ways, and yet there are things that I completely judge and hate and find completely repulsive about rural life. And so part of it maybe is when I might perceive that someone is judging rural life harshly because I judge it harshly. But I also have a kind of sense of, well, I know how to judge it because I actually have lived in it, whereas you're basing your judgment on simpleton, demeaning caricatures in the movies and TV shows you saw. Because while there is a certain element of, I guess you'd say, dumb and ugly, I hate saying that, but it's like there is an element of that kind of thing. But there's also tons of people that aren't in that stereotype. But I think it's a sore spot when that's the one thing about rural culture that you're very keen on. You wish that it wasn't like that. Like, I don't like a resignation to bleak ugliness. I know that sounds horrible, but I mean ugliness in keeping towns that look like they're rundown ghost towns. And yes, there's actual poverty that keeps people stuck and from being able to do more. But also what keeps those communities kind of that dry, run down, is that people who grow up in that move away from it because there's a depression to it. There's a bleakness, and they want to go to the new, the vital. They get away from really the deadness. Like people act like, well, why are the young people not here? Well, of course they're not here. This feels dead. This feels like, and there's a stuckness to it instead of like people acting like they prefer like all this bleakness to what would actually be a really beautiful. If they act like they would rather be like laying in the mud than getting it together and trying to clean up and kind of beautify their home, their town, anything, you know. And I understand being in that, because once you kind of get stuck and then you kind of get depressed and in that feudalism, you don't get just a burst of energy to get out of it. You're really, it's a slow moving kind of stuckness. That, and I think that too, there's like rural communities, they have a defensiveness about it, and that becomes a pride. There's like a two-sided coin of this pride and defensiveness, where they're trying to act like, well, we're tough and busy and we don't care about how our community looks like it's some weird ghost town from the 50s. But I mean, it's just the stereotypes in terms of that kind of, oh, this is kind of a unsavory, unsanitary, run down, kind of dilapidated, meat and potatoes, and kind of if only there could be a little bit more, could we just see some leaves springing out of the cracks of this kind of world. And so that's the thing, like I'm realizing I have that. Like say if I encounter somebody that's wearing camo or army gear or jeans with the sparkly butt from 2005, I mean, I will have this cringe kind of annoyance that they take pride in looking like that. And that's partly because it reflects to me this kind of superiority in being kind of unkempt and ugly, and then just like really making hunting animals your main identity point. And honestly, I should just get over it, right? I should. But it bothers me, because it's like, I think, well, this is, if you meet somebody who is has a more well-dressed look and is more well-spoken, they're going to think that you are that dumb hick. And they don't like that being reflected as a thing. I want it to be that there's all kinds of people who are in rural environments, because there are. So, and it is a superficial thing, because it's like, well, some people, they have a certain uniform, and that's how it is. And some people, it's an extreme judgment I have that actually reflects the very judgment that I'm always protesting so hard against. So it's very revealing. So it makes me see that within me, I'm having judgment and disdain that I'm then thinking that other people have, and then I'm defending against it with the same defensiveness and pride that people in rural communities have when someone comes at them with that sense of superiority. So it's making me see, oh, I am this, and it's like, it's just very fascinating, because it's like if you always make fun of your brother for something, and then somebody else makes fun of him for it, and you're like, no way, I'm going to beat you up because only I get to say that to my brother. That's kind of how I feel with rural life, or with this kind of rural caricature. Because I do feel as though even though I had an experience growing up in a rural environment, I'll watch a TV show that depicts it a certain way and I'll think, oh, well, most rural environments are probably like this depiction, and I just had a different experience. So see how powerful the perception created by media is. Even when I am someone that has a lived experience of it, I'll watch that and take it as more truthful and more representative than my own idea. Because, you know, I think there's a, like, here's another thing that, you know, that's such a, like, oh, look at you, it has that kind of Minnesotan accent that people mock, and that sneaks in, and that bothers me, because then I'm like, I don't like to look dumb with saying, you know, but when I'm looking at this, it's making me realize it's coming from me. Yes, there's people that have these knee-jerk stereotypical ideas and caricature view of rural, but it's my own internalized rural phobia and judgment toward things that is the mirror in which I see and react and double down and get defensive to. So it's revealing. It's revealing that I am creating this fight of thinking that people are judging because I have my own judgments toward rural life. So, and there is a thing with rural culture that there is a lot of things to highlight and to admire, just like with city culture. There's the striving. It's great to admire, but it's great to also see the deficit. It's great to see, okay, don't get bogged down in this, what's the use, futility. And then likewise, don't get caught up in the bustle of always striving. Both of those are coping mechanisms and ways of life that have their disadvantages and their limitations. So anyway, just my thoughts as I navigate my own rural phobia, or that's just the term I came up with. I definitely see it in myself, and it's very shallow and it's very unfair, but it's there.